we know that nothing really fantastic happens from your comfort zone, right? So it's a comfortable place to be, it's cozy, it's warm, I like it here, but am I really going to make a difference in the world? Am I really going to grow as a human from my comfort zone? And the answer is no.
What is up, Impact Heroes? Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rick Ornelas. Thank you for spending some time with us today because we know time's a valuable resource and we're going to make it worth your while. I appreciate each and every one of you, not just for listening, but for who you are. I know you're sparking change to make the world a better place every day, and I am humbled and grateful for your efforts. It takes all of us doing our part to spread positive change, and that's what this show is all about. Motivating you with stories of struggle, courage, and hope to empower you to make a difference in your life and the lives of others.
In case you missed it.
Now, prioritization is a key component of time management. It's actually what most people struggle with when it comes to finding time.
Available everywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Welcome back, Impact Heroes. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking to our latest iSpark Change social impact hero, and she is a special one. Our guest loves amplifying the voice of people and brands that need to be heard. She's a university lecturer and TEDx host who loves podcasts and houseplants. So maybe she can teach me a thing or two about those houseplants because I don't do so well with those. She loves pursuing, exploring, and creating as an entrepreneur, and that is what fills her cup daily. She's a mother of 3 who once took all those kiddos off the beaten path with their family to 5 continents, 19 countries, and 69,000 kilometers, which I know is a lot of miles too. And we will dive into that for sure, because that is super interesting to me. She's a born leader who loves maximizing optimism, confidence, high-performing leadership, and diversity and inclusion. And that sounds like a recipe for a great hero. So please welcome the authentic, driven, empowering, and amazing Sunny McGaw. Sunny, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for that ultra cool intro. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're quite welcome. It's your story. I just read it for the show, but you're the one that did all those amazing things. So thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So being invited to this show, I see it as an honor because this show is all about social impact heroes and those that we consider individuals that make a difference in the world, that are impacting the lives of others and making them better, and in turn, making the world a better place. So I see you that way. But the first question I have for you is, do you see yourself as a hero, Sunny?
Well, thank you, Rick. And as a fan of your show, I knew this question was going to come up. And I have to say that I'm going to fall in the 80% of people who say, no, of course I'm not a hero. I'm not one of those 20% of people. First of all, I'm Canadian. Second of all, I'm a woman. So you know that I'm not going to say I'm a hero. By your definition, though, by the acronym that you use, perhaps, because that's a different one. But by the standard definition of hero, I would say no. Although I do have one quote I like, and that's by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he says that a hero is just like the average person. They're just brave for 5 minutes longer. So that's the definition that I can get my head around, because I think I'm pretty tenacious. So if I can just stick at something for 5 minutes longer, and that makes me, I can't even say the word though, heroic, then I can do that. But no, the very long answer is no, I'm not a hero. Of course not.
Okay, well, I can definitely appreciate that, Sunny, and thank you for sharing, and especially the quote. I do love that quote. It's kind of similar to Joseph Campbell's, the hero's journey, and his definition of the hero as an ordinary person thrust into extraordinary circumstances that, takes action, that they do something. And so that goes along with that 5 minutes of just 5 minutes longer, and you can do, you can stick through it.
Absolutely.
And I'll bet that, like, as you know from listening to the show, I'll bet that by the end I have you convinced with your actions as we go through them that you are a hero. Okay. Whether you like to call yourself or not, I don't like to call myself a hero. Although I by my definition I have to, but I don't. Just try to be modest in that regard. So I totally get that. So, Sunny, every hero has their origin story of how they got to they are today. You know, how they're doing the work that they're doing, how they're impacting others, how they're showing up to the world. So I know, when I've read that when you were young, you had certain dreams and you liked art and everything. And so how did you become a hero? How did you get to where you are today?
Great question. Well, I'll take you back to my very early days. And I was raised, my brother and I, Mike, were raised by two of the most optimistic people on the planet. So my father, businessman, he raised us from the earliest ages with Dale Carnegie and Winston Churchill quotes. One of the first things I remember hearing was, never give up. Never, never give up. Never, never, never give up. So that really impacted my life, that kind of optimism, that kind of positivity, that kind of grit and tenacity. And then my mom was a kindergarten teacher, and she had zero tolerance for boredom. In fact, saying that you were bored in my house was worse than swearing. So she encouraged my brother and I through kind of, optimism and threats to never be bored. So she would never buy us a coloring book, for example. It would always be blank pieces of paper. And we'd take nature walks where she'd encourage us to find the fascinating in the mundane, in the everyday. So that combination of optimism and creativity, I think that makes people unstoppable. And my brother and I both ended up being very creative people because of that. So that's my origin story, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, of course. And we, we'll dive into kind of moving a little bit farther along the timeline there. But I want to go back to what you were talking about, your parents, because obviously we are all a product of our upbringing, of our parents and family members and society and everything. So your father was very interested, it sounds like, in, leadership and personal development, everything. So what did he do? What was his profession?
Oh, actually, it's going to sound very strange, but he was an accountant, which is obviously on this end of the spectrum, but he was an entrepreneur. So he was one of the founders of a company called Hospital and Kitchen, and it's all over the world. But mostly their biggest client was McDonald's. So that company put stainless steel into McDonald's. So my dad took McDonald's to Russia and to China back in, in the 80s and 90s when it was really renegade. It was really interesting work that he did. And then he was fortunate he retired at 55 and now he's a fantastic golfer.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story in itself, just, in his work and everything. So definitely a good role model, between or good role models, I should say, between your father and your mother as a kindergarten teacher. So I'm curious, because having some family members that are in education, were you in her class when you were young? Were you in her class as a kindergartner?
I was, and it was my favorite thing in the world, Rick. When she would come in, she was a substitute kindergarten teacher for my class, and I felt so special when she'd come in. And she was a great piano player too, so she'd play the piano, and I can still remember how great that felt to have her there.
Yeah. So did you call her mom? Did you call her mom when she was there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wasn't pulling any punches. Yeah, that was my mom. I was proud of it.
Yeah. My aunt and godmother, her, my two cousins, they were both, she was a high school Spanish teacher, but they were both in her class, and, it was very taboo for them to call her mom, but they would always slip. And, and say, mom, or not raise their hand or whatever. So I always thought that was kind of funny.
Oh, that's really cute.
Yeah, exactly. So let's move along the timeline, because you have you have those role models, right? You're learning to be creative. Your father's an entrepreneur and he's having success. So how did that translate into your development and your kind of early career, if you will?
Great question. Well, I was right out of university. I went to work for 3 years for Club Med. I became an archery teacher, of all things. Wow. And so this is a pretty neat story. And I can say I learned this from my father. He was, one to say, if you're up against a challenge or you really want something, make sure that there's no way you can't get it. Just do everything you can to make sure, or not, you're never certain, but to just stack the odds in your favor. Mm-hmm. So this might seem a little bit small, but when I was 11, my parents took us to Club Med for the first time, and I fell in love with it. Are you familiar with
Yeah.
So it's the first all-inclusive ever in the world. And so I decided at that age, at 11, I want to work here someday. And, that's a pretty big dream for an 11-year-old. Well, fast forward 11 years and I'm graduating university. And I still had this thought that it would be great after graduating university to spend a few years traveling, right? Don't we all think that's a great, great dream to have?
Yep.
So I called up the Club Med a year before I graduated. And I said to them, what do you never have enough of? And they said, well, we always have enough childcare people. We always have enough sailing instructors. We always have enough receptionists, but we never have anyone who knows how to do archery. And we teach archery here. So I was like, okay, I'm on it. So I spent 1 year, Rick. I bought a bow, the biggest like Rambo style bow. I joined a club. I got a coach and I practiced for 1 year. And I became such a good archer that I actually was trained I could teach at an Olympic level. So I was massively, massively overqualified. And then I called the Club Med up again and I said, I'd like to have an interview. And they said, okay, well, you can have an interview over the phone with the Montreal office. And I said, no, I want to come to the head office. Like I want this job so badly. I'm coming to your head office. And at that time it was in Port St. Lucie, Florida. So I flew myself on my own dime down to their office. I showed up for my interview with my bow and arrows and targets as if I was going to shoot. And they took one look at me and they said, you're hired. Like, if you show me this level of dedication, you've got this. So that was definitely something I learned from my dad is like, if you want something bad enough, you be tenacious as all get out. And I ended up working for Club Med for 3 years and I loved it the day I left as much as the day I started, but I was ready to get into the so-called real world. And that's when I got into advertising in Toronto.
That is a phenomenal story. I don't think we've ever had a story like that of, kind of dedication and the desire to go after a goal and, with like such focus and drive. So I have a bunch of questions here, Sunny. First off, just so I don't forget, where in those 3 years, did you always work at the same location or where were you during those 3 years?
No, I traveled around. So Club Med usually moves you every 6 to 12 months. So I spent a year in the Dominican Republic, a little bit of time in the Bahamas, and then 2 years in Mexico, both on the East Coast and the West Coast.
Oh, so you got your dream of traveling for more than a year for a few years. So that's awesome. And then in archery, like I enjoyed it a little bit when I was a kid, but had you ever fired a bow, anything?
Handful of times at summer camp. Yeah, not really. No.
Really. Okay.
Not really.
So how much time were you devoting? You said a year, but how much time on like a weekly basis were you devoting?
Probably 4 or 5 hours.
4 or 5 hours a week. Okay. So, maybe an hour every day during the week or something like that.
Yeah. I also read Zen and the Art of Archery and all of the famous archery books. I wanted to be fully immersed. I played soundtrack to Last of the Mohicans as often as I could because that was like an archery movie. Yeah.
Yeah, this is, I guess, before its time. But when you said you brought your bow to the interview, I was getting visions of Katniss Everdeen in The Hunger Games, where she shoots the apple, in the pig's mouth if you know that scene.
I absolutely do. I'm pretty much Katniss every year for Halloween because I still have my bow.
Yes.
That or Robin Hood, right?
Oh, that's fantastic. But I can see how that dedication was. Just you had the focus plan and you put it into action and then you weren't ready to say no. I too did go down, fly myself on my own dime for this position that I really wanted in Florida, different. It was in Boca Raton, Florida. I ended up not getting it, which for, different reasons, but I can definitely appreciate if I had gone, I probably didn't go those couple extra steps that you went, in determining their deeper need, if you will, that, would have made it, kind of increase the chances, like you say, where, essentially it's a no-brainer. So very, very cool. Very, very cool.
Thank you.
So you're coming out of Club Med. What interested you about advertising and marketing?
That's a great question. I have a degree in fine arts and art history and a minor in philosophy. So my dad used to joke that I have a degree in sounding good at a cocktail party. And I went to Canada's best business school and I studied those studies. So anyhow, I loved it. I loved my degree. I've never regretted what I studied, but I found, okay, so I've got all this creativity and I love it. Well, what can I do with that? And I looked at, can I make it as an artist? Well, only if I want to starve. So I decided I didn't want to starve. So I thought, okay, what can I do otherwise? Advertising seemed like a really good opportunity. And I was really fortunate to get into advertising in Toronto. This agency I worked for was called Echo. And it's a great story. Echo was a boutique agency. And so we were kind of competing against all these like big McLaren and McCann and the big agencies in Toronto. But it was the hottest shop. And maybe because it was a small agency, but Echo had sort of everybody was in their mid to late 20s, and we had really cool clients. So we had Starbucks had just come to Canada. We had Alliance Atlantis Films. We had the Toronto Film Festival. We even had the Rolling Stones as our clients, like this small agency. And we were all in our mid 20s. And so we, lived and breathed our jobs, and it was so much fun. But what was really impactful to me about that job was the leader. So I had the owner is named Len Gill, and he was just a behemoth of a man. He's South African. And I swear that the only way he walked was a stomp. Like he's just one of those characters. But I learned so much from him. And he was my first really strong leader, but also mentor. And I still think back to him these days, like to this day, and everything I learned from him. And one of the things that I tried very hard to carry with me, there's several of them, but one thing that I'd love to share was how deeply he cared about his people. So this was the late 90s, and we were in our 20s. So a lot of people smoked cigarettes, and Len hated smoking. So he incentivized us all. And he said, if you quit smoking for 6 months, I will give you $1,000 out of my pocket. And that was a significant amount of money back then to us.
Yeah, of course.
So not only would he gather us all around when someone had quit and hand them $1,000 cash out of his pocket, he'd have a party. And I still get shivers thinking about it, Rick, because it just showed this deep sense of caring about us. And can you imagine the loyalty that conjured up in us, that feeling like he's such a strong, powerful leader, but he cares about us.
Yeah, the loyalty and the accountability and, the care.
You say authenticity. I know you speak a lot about authenticity. It's marvelous.
Yeah, you had some fantastic leaders in your life, it sounds like. So what, other than the caring about your people, what would you say, because we talk a lot about mentorship on and leadership on this podcast, as you've probably heard, what would you say is there's tons of value you get from a mentor, but what would you say is one of, the biggest thing that you've learned, or something else, if that was it, from Len? Okay,
well, the list is long, but I have thought about this a lot, and I've written about it a few times as well. High expectations. So one of the high expectations that Len had was pretty simple: punctuality. So if a meeting started at 8, the door was closed and locked at 8:05, not 8:05 minutes, 8:05 seconds. And that door was not opening. And it was absolutely known fundamental rule. And it was a little scary at first, a little intimidating, but I learned to love it because it is the easiest way to show someone you respect them and you respect their time.
Yeah. Right? Which, as I look at it, as time is the most valuable thing we have on earth. And
absolutely.
And so I love that. I'm gonna have to implement that in my business for our team. So the other side of mentorship and leadership, as you having three kids, as I do, my wife and I do, is how that translates into your life, right? There's the things that you learn along your way. You pick up things from your parents, these great leaders and everything. And then that translates out to your team, that translates out in parenting, I guarantee it. So how have you been able to share some of this wisdom that you've imparted along the way? Like in the hero's journey, you're supposed to bestow those beams of wisdom that you've learned. How have you've been able to do that, and what have been the challenges along the way in doing so?
Oh, that's a great question, Rick. I think one of the other pieces of wisdom that I gained from Len, I've definitely taken forward, and that is to get out of your comfort zone, right? we know that nothing really fantastic happens from your comfort zone, right? So it's a comfortable place to be. It's cozy. It's warm. I like it here. But am I really going to make a difference in the world? Am I really going to grow as a human from my comfort zone? And the answer is no. So back to what you said in the introduction, in 2017, 2018, my husband and I took our 3 kids backpacking around the world for 10 months. And it was to get them out of their comfort zone. It was to help, fairly privileged young kids see how people really live around the world. Mm-hmm. And to hopefully burn some paths in their mind about what's possible, and that hard things are brilliant, and they don't have to be comfortable or easy to be really meaningful and impactful. And when we're together, the 5 of us, or even sometimes just a couple of us, but our family talks about that trip all the time. And we talk about the hard things and the difficult things and the travel days and sleeping on floors and, being really uncomfortable, and how much we loved it.
The lessons that your children learned from that trip, I mean, those will last them a lifetime. Yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. So how did what was the genesis of that idea to go on this trip?
Well, actually, it starts as a bit of a sad story, I'll warn you, but it turns out happy. One of my dearest friends was stricken with cancer in her 30s. Wow. Out of the blue. Yeah, very scary stuff, very serious cancer. She had some surgeries. I stayed with her. I helped her and her family, as we all did, and she got better. So there's the good news. But good. When I came home from staying with her the first time, I said to my husband, I said to John, that dream that we've talked about, that thing about traveling around the world with our kids, because we just sort of had mentions of it, because we're both pretty adventurous souls. I said, I think we need to put this in action, because if we just keep talking about it, nothing's happening. And that's a big thing for me, is having a bias for action. So that was 2016. So Rick, we spent 1 year planning for 1 year abroad. And that's the ratio I tell people. Is a lot of people call me and they want to know my thoughts on, like, what does it take? And I said, it takes however long you're going for, put that ahead, and that's how long you need to plan. Yeah. So, that's fantastic. So what would you say was your favorite place, if you could narrow it down to one out of 19 countries and, all sure. Those miles? I've actually been to 40 countries. So that there's that as well. But that trip, Cambodia. Oh, and yeah, what did you love about Cambodia? It was the biggest surprise to me. Now, I've been to Southeast Asia a few times before, but I'd never been to Cambodia. And Cambodia is one of the most bombed countries in the world, right? I think it's 1 in 300 people has been affected by a landmine. Jeez. Oh yeah, and there's still plenty of landmines unexploded there. And the war that they knew, the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, that was in our lifetime. So this is a country that was recently just shaken, and I can't remember how many millions of people died. However, these were the friendliest, nicest, warmest, and most positive and optimistic people that we encountered. And second to that, I'll also mention Nepal too. Also, impoverished country by our standards, but the kindest, nicest people. And that was not lost on my kids. And I loved that, because they went away from that saying, well, wealth doesn't equate to happiness. And yeah, absolutely. Which is a great lesson for, kids to learn at a young age. So it sounds like a lot of their, as I said, lessons that will last them for a lifetime, and maybe some of that inspiration for their future, like was for you with Club Med at the age of 11. Mm-hmm. Any inspiration that you've seen manifest itself now in the past few years as a result of that trip in your children? Absolutely. I think as an overall blanket statement, I can say they're more grateful, right? So before we left on our trip, Rick, we were interviewed by a Canadian news station called the CBC. And they asked our kids, how do you think your life in Canada compares to the lives around the world? And they said, we think we're pretty average. And I thought, okay, you're in for an eye opener here, kids. And now I think that they're more grateful for the small things for everything. They're just more grateful for everything in life. And I think I see a dialed up level of altruism. So my oldest boy, Angus, is in university now, and he's studying agriculture and business. And the course that he liked most of all last year was about poverty. And how can we reduce poverty in a meaningful way for the generation to come? I thought that's interesting. Like, 'cause he's seen poverty like not many other kids his age. Because of the 19 countries we went to, 16 were developing nations.
Yeah, that's a great lesson to learn, and it speaks to what may become some of his eventual purpose in life, or some of the things that he works on. So I want to get back to some of the things about you, and then the being a hero and some of the work that you do now. So what would you say, Sunny, is your current purpose and mission?
I always think of my North Star as being leave things better than you found them. So that's a pretty big one. But my purpose professionally is definitely to help female entrepreneurs. So, and I specifically work with, whenever possible, female entrepreneurs in their prime. And you may wonder, what is in their prime? That's not a thing I recognize. Well, this is a word I coined. So, because I didn't like the term middle-aged. I thought it sounded really antiquated and really kind of, boring, to say the bad word. So I thought in their prime is a nicer way of looking at it. And I think that most of the women who I work with, 40, 45 plus, feel like they're in their prime. So that's who I work with now. And I help them succeed. I help them with their entrepreneurial endeavors.
And those are part of the journey that you've been on. I'm guessing that you've been on yourself. And so you've lived it and walked that path. And so now you can help them in their path and their hero's journey, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
is the plan.
So how do you, to continue, I mean, that you're definitely honoring your purpose in what you do. So how are you engaging others in your mission? How are you sharing it with others and kind of rallying them to the cause of helping other entrepreneurial women?
Well, first of all, I'll go back to maybe just a little genesis of why, and then I'll get more into that meaty question. So when I became a creative director for the first time, I was 39. I'd taken a few years off to have my babies, and I came back to working in advertising, and I never thought I would become a creative director. I thought that ship has sailed. I'm too old. I'm a woman. And at that time, only 3% of creative directors were women.
Wow.
That was, So I was delighted to have that role. And then working in that role and I was working for our biggest client was a pop and chips company, so snack food company. Mm-hmm. And I did that for a couple of years, but I really felt that even though as happy as I was to be a creative director, I didn't feel like I was serving my purpose. In fact, I felt like I was getting further and further away from my purpose because I was selling pop and chips, and it didn't feel, like we talked about earlier, health is important to me. But really what the last straw was for me, Rick, was that I found out that on our staff, we had someone, a psychologist, who specifically looked into when they could sell the most sugary sodas to moms, when the moms felt the most guilty about not being great mothers. That's when they sold the most pop, the most sugary, the most pink colored pop. And I was horrified.
Yes,
I'm like, I'm a mom. We feel there's guilt. Mother guilt is real. And I thought, oh gosh, we're exploiting these vulnerable women. And I actually resigned the next week, and I didn't look back. Wow. So yeah, and that was part of the real genesis of this purpose. And then how do I share it? I talk about it to anybody who will listen. I sing it from the rooftops, how important it is. Both, diversity, inclusion, equity, giving opportunities to those who might struggle to find them. I write about it. I'm delivering another TED Talk next month about it.
Oh, so nice. I
kind of just don't shut up about it.
So the TED Talk, that you have one about your trip, right? You have one where you talk about your trip. And then is this your second one or third one, or? This
is my second one. I've also hosted a TED event.
Oh, okay, so, gotcha. All right. I was thinking, I thought there was just the other one, but okay. Yeah, very, very cool. So that will be your topic for this upcoming one?
Yes. It's about having a success mindset. And I have a framework. It's called the You Slay framework. And I'm sharing that. So it's about how to be successful as an entrepreneur. But as we've talked about, if you're successful as an entrepreneur in your mindset, that mindset waves out the rest of your life. So I think it's a very optimistic talk, and I think it'll make the whole audience feel, alive and rejuvenated.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've talked a lot about mindset on this show. It is super important, whether you're an entrepreneur or anyone, obviously, but it does help, quite a bit in that entrepreneurial journey and in that hero's journey. So you've definitely, you definitely are doing what you can to, to spread that message to others, to help spread that positive change and, help show other individuals that it's not always easy, that, there are going to be pitfalls and, dragons to slay or, arrows that have to fly in your case, but, definitely sharing those lessons along the way with others. So you're check in terms of, the acronym of the hero.
Yeah.
And I would say, and, just in our conversation that, I feel that our audience will definitely come away knowing that they've learned more about who you are, about who Sunny McGaw is as an individual and as a mom. I think a lot in what we shared. So definitely open your heart to the world. What would you say would be something that you would share with those entrepreneurial, women in their prime that you work with on a regular basis and help them to improve? What would be one message that you would want to share for any of them that are listening?
Oh, that's great. Great question. One message. I would say the one thing that separates the successful from the unsuccessful is what I mentioned earlier. Have a bias for action. Take action. There are so many good ideas out there, and good ideas and great ideas are even a dime a dozen. Mm-hmm. I remember my first startup, I'm embarrassed to say, 15 years ago, if I was going to talk about my startup idea, I had people sign an NDA because I was so worried about someone stealing my idea. Mm-hmm. And now I know how foolhardy that is, because you can share the most brilliant ideas in the world. The amount of people who will take action is so very small. So I say to women, don't wait to have a perfect product. Perfection is the absolute enemy. Don't spend too much time polishing. Get your idea out into the world. So the expression is MVP, your minimum viable product. Get your minimum viable product into the hands of actual people, actual users. Then get the feedback, iterate, and relaunch. And that is the fastest way to get real feedback and to get a really great product or service into the world. Waiting for perfection or waiting for the right time is just, it'll just clobber you.
Yeah, and it never comes, right? It never comes. That's when perfectionism sits in, and all the, and there's never enough time. As we talked about the value of time earlier, all those things happen, and then you've never taken action. So it's going back all the way to what you learned from your dad so early on. Right. So yeah, that's fantastic. Full circle. So I think that's an awesome segue to, one of our final questions here, Sunny, that we ask all our guests. And at iSpark Change, we talk about spark moments, which are those moments where our actions have a ripple effect that goes far and beyond the initial act, or someone else's actions have a ripple effect on us. And it's oftentimes much later that you notice that ripple effect. Like I could hear that in different things you were saying, that ripple effect of, the impact of your father or your mom, or even what you learned probably on your journey of training yourself in archery and learning archery. So share a story of a spark moment that's an example of how a story of positive change, an example of something that, where you've impacted someone or they've been impacted.
Great question. I do like ending your shows with this question. It's such an exciting one, such an optimistic one. So in the past several years, I worked with one of my dear high school friends. His name is Dr. Ivan Joseph, and he has a TED Talk called The Skill of Self-Confidence. It has 26 million views. It is one of the most watched, up there with Simon Sinek and Brené Brown. It is fantastic. I absolutely encourage you to watch it. And so Ivan and I worked together to start his business called Ivan Joseph Leadership. And we partnered together for several years. And I can't say it was an actual moment, but that working relationship and working with Ivan, who specialized, he has his PhD is in, essentially self-confidence. It had such an impact on me. And that notion that believing in yourself is the epicenter to everything great. And that doesn't mean being boastful. And that doesn't mean not listening to others or not having a growth mindset at all. In fact, it's the opposite, but just believing that you can accomplish things. And that has absolutely permanently changed my life. And I believe my kids, because I do mention it from time to time. Believe in yourself. Believe that you can make a difference in the world, and that voice that might be telling you not, that you can't do it. That bad voice inside. Quiet it down. There's different ways of doing that, but quiet that voice down and believe in yourself, and you can accomplish anything.
Yeah, that's where it all starts, right? That belief. And getting past those limiting beliefs that you were talking about. So excellent example of a spark moment. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sunny. So I know our audience is going to want to learn more about you and about the ways that you're impacting others. And there might be some of those entrepreneurial women out there that want to go dive deeper. So where can they connect with you? Where can they learn more about you and your work?
Great. I'd love to talk to anybody that's interested about entrepreneurial success. And I can be found pretty much everywhere at thesunnymcgaw.com. You can find me I'm really active every day, daily tips on Instagram. On my website, I've got a lot of freebies, free downloads for you. And I'm also happy to connect on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Well, we will make sure all of those are in the show notes. So thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing all the wisdom, as I said. Well, our final question here that we ask every guest, because our goal at iSpark Change is to positively impact 1 billion people in the next 5 years through our community and through our upcoming social impact social media platform. Now, we know we can't do this alone, and we know we need the help of impactful leaders like yourself to show others the way, because many people feel, as I once did, that they're too small to make a difference and to change the world. So I value your thoughts and opinions as a social impact hero. So I'm going to ask you to peer into the future, not just the iSpark Change future, but peer into, our crystal ball and the future of the world, and tell us, what can the world become if everybody starts believing that everybody starts taking action and believing that they can impact our future?
I love that. Well, I have a lot of hope for the next generation. I must say, my 3 kids are teens. I have a lot of hope for the next generation. I think they're so socially aware. And I think that can be a really beautiful thing. So if we share our awareness through the lens of positivity, I think the world can be a better place for the generation to come.
Agreed. 100%. Yeah, I've done some some work with Gen Z, and I have 3 daughters in Gen Z and everything, and I've seen it firsthand. What you talk about is their social awareness and everything. So I couldn't agree more, and I think we will see that.
Me too.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you for taking time to share your heart and your wisdom with our audience, Sunny. You came in, you over-delivered as I expected you to, and your desire to be impactful is evident, and you're filled with passion, determination, and you lead with a heart of gratitude, which tells me you're going to continue to have success in all facets of life. And this is only the beginning of your time as a social impact hero.
Thanks so much, Rick. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. All right, Impact Heroes, it's our stories that connect us all, and we loved hearing Sunny today. Sunny McGaw, you are not only an inspiring and amazing human being, but you truly are an iSpark Change social impact hero. We'll see you all next time.
Do you want Rick to speak at your event? Here's what others have to say.
Did not know his story, and it was so inspirational, and his presence on stage, his authenticity was just incredible.
I absolutely loved his performance. Made me feel some type of way.
If you're looking for a speaker for your next event, hire Rick. I promise you this, you will not be disappointed.
Visit rickcornelis.com to book him today.
Remember, Impact Heroes, every positive action can be a spark moment that has a ripple effect that spreads far beyond the initial act. So go out there and spark change. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, then please smash that 5-star rating on iTunes or Spotify and leave a review. We value your comments, and we want to hear from you in the community. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and we'll see you next week on the iSpark Change podcast.